What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we have some Detroit Lions news. The Lions have given us a nice little schedule on the guys that the Lions will interview over the next week and beyond for the head coaching position and for the general manager position. So let's get it started.
I got to shout out DoseOfDion, man, because it was actually the first time I went live on YouTube. And, guys don't know DoseOfDion. He put out a lot of good content for the Detroit Lions.
Welcome everybody to another video. Glad you guys are here, and there are a lot of candidates to talk about into today's video, so I'm trying to keep it very condensed and fly through each candidate. But I'm not sure if the Lions have to do this. Maybe they have to do it. I'm not exactly sure, but I know there are rules to how many people that you have to interview for these positions before you make a hire. So the Lions gave us a nice little schedule. They put out by each day who they will be interviewing, when they plan to interview these guys. A lot of guys for the GM position, a lot of guys for the head coach position. We already know the Lions have interviewed some people, especially for the GM spot. We've talked about Louis Riddick before. I know there's a pretty good amount of guys. I haven't really heard that many names for the head coach position. That one seems to be a little bit more closed off. But now we have this nice little schedule set out. I fully expect there to be many more interviews as the weeks go on. I don't think the Lions are going to take this week and then just hire somebody. I hope they don't do that. But I believe there will be more interviews to come. However, the Lions put up the schedule, so we're going to talk about the candidates that are on this list. The guys that we've already talked about into detail before, I'm not going to talk about them very much in today's video because, look, I don't want to make the video 30 minutes, and I'd honestly rather just talk about the guys that we haven't talked about. That way I'm not, kind of repeating the same thing. Just go out and say this before the video gets started because it does apply to every single head coach that we will look at. Honestly, it also applies to the GM position, but we'll talk about that in a second. But for the head coaches on this list, every head coach candidate, none of these guys have experience as a head coach, aside from Dan Campbell, who was an interim head coach with the Miami Dolphins for one season. None of these other guys have been a head coach before, which means it's going to be very vital that they're able to hire the right people around them, the right coordinators, the right staff to be able to run a practice. There's a lot of things that are kind of up in the air. Doesn't necessarily mean they've done bad or there's things on the resume. We'll talk about when we get to each candidate. I'll show a little picture of, pros and cons that I took away, just kind of the simple ones because I'm trying to go quick. This isn't just a breakdown of one guy. This is a lot of people we have to talk about. But I just want to point out that there's a lot of unknown when you hire a guy that's never done it before, because as much as they may do well at their coordinator job, the head coaching position is something completely different. And if you've never done it before, there's a lot of things that you are just not sure if they're going to be able to make it happen or not. No matter how well they were as a coordinator, you just don't know how that's going to translate to being an NFL head coach. So that is just the one thing that I want to point out now, because there's no reason for me to point out with every single head coach. Not saying these guys are bad. I'm just saying that is the case with all of them. Okay, so I want to point it out now. Clearly, me personally, I want experience there, but I do want to point that out. That way I don't do it to every single person because that's just going to get repetitive. So it will show up on their cons just because, well, some of them don't have that many cons, to be honest with you, but it is important that I do mention that now that is the case with all of them, aside from Dan Campbell, who you will get to, who was an interim head coach, but he didn't go through the process of hiring guys, finding coordinators, doing all this and that, because he was just the interim head coach. He just took over for the remainder of the season. You can kind of say the same thing for the general manager position, because as we go through this, there's only one general manager, as we will go through, that has had experience as a GM, as he is currently a GM right now, and it is John Schneider, who you'll talk about at the very end of the video, but we did talk about him a little bit yesterday as well, if you guys want to check that out. But that's John Schneider. Aside from that, none of these guys have actually been the GM before, which means making the final decision, making the final call, being the final say. I mean, you have an influence, but are you the final say? How much power are you going to get? There's a lot of questions here. So when you have head coaches, GMs that never done it before, the power thing is going to be very interesting. So we'll see. The Lions said that experience would be a factor, not a requirement. So we'll see what they do. But again, I think there's going to be tons of interviews to come. But I do agree with interviewing everybody out there. So again, I want to point that out with the GMs as well. Let's get to it. Let's take a look at the head coaches that are on this list first. The head coach candidates, not necessarily the head coaches, but the guys that are candidates to be our next head coach. First off, Eric Bieniemy today. So Eric Bieniemy is scheduled to have an interview with the Detroit Lions today. Talked about Eric Bieniemy a lot. He is the offensive coordinator right now for the Kansas City Chiefs. Definitely not my favorite target for the Detroit Lions. I'm definitely concerned with how he did with Colorado when he was the offensive coordinator there. It has been going very well right now with the Kansas City Chiefs. See, for my concerns, my first one is Colorado. In his first year when he took over as the offensive coordinator, the offense did improve statistically, but after that, it went downhill in terms of it actually got worse than when he was there before. One of the seasons, they only won a game. Now, college is difficult because of recruiting, but they still had some really rough years with him as the offensive coordinator. In his final year, they kind of got back on track a little bit better than what it was when he got there, but it wasn't a very successful stint. And then you can see, the law issues, and this is something that came up multiple times. At one point, he was actually arrested in a bar fight, and, there's a couple of things that have come up. This is way in his past, so, Is he moved forward from it? I hope so. You know, I always think second chances are important, but he has gotten in trouble in the past. So that is something to point out for sure. I think it's important that you point out someone's character and what they've, got in trouble with, things like that, because he's been in trouble a few times. There's been a couple of things in the past. I mean, maybe, I don't know the full extent, so I'm not going to go off on him or anything like that, but I just think it's important to point out those issues. Now, the good things is that right now with Kansas City, their offense is playing at an extremely high level. And even if it's more Andy Reid than him, he could be able to take something from that and potentially bring it to Detroit, which is good because he could definitely have learned. I think Andy Reid disciples are also pretty good as well. So that's definitely on the positive note for him. People are asking, well, if he's so bad at Colorado, then how did he get a job in the NFL? I personally believe a lot of him getting the job in the NFL was because he was with Andy Reid, in terms of Andy Reid was coaching him when he was a running back. So that got him in the door, being that coach for them, that specific positional coach. And eventually he became the offensive coordinator for Kansas City. But again, it wasn't like the offense was doing anything bad. They weren't a terrible offense when he took over. He has improved them, yes, and I think he could learn a lot from it, so that could be very beneficial. But it wasn't like they were really bad, and they also have a ridiculous amount of talent. Eric will be the guy calling plays in the playoffs for their offense, so that is important. I think that's a really nice thing to see. Being a former running back potentially could help out some running backs. He's been a former running back and a running back coach as well, so that could bring some table. He worked with Adrian Peterson, so maybe that makes Adrian Peterson more apt to stay, as in, hey, yeah, I do that. And we know a few Lions right now are already, kind of pushed for him, those two guys being Chase Daniel and Reggie Ragland. So he may have some influence there because those guys are familiar with him. Hey, if you've played with the coach before, a lot of times you're going to see him push. That's usually a good thing. He's had some support behind him, that's for sure. Darrell Bevell, our own Darrell Bevell, will interview with the Detroit Lions. I kind of would have thought this would have been first, but no, it's going to be Tuesday, which I think is a very good idea. It's a must to interview the guy that's, been your interim head coach and see what he thinks about the team, because this guy has had the most hands-on experience that any candidate's going to get the opportunity to have. So you get to hear about what his future plans would be, what he's looking to do at each positional group, everything like that. I mean, I don't know exactly what questions they're going to ask him in an interview. I wish we could listen in and maybe get some sound bites from it, but I do know that Darrell Bevell will be interviewing on Tuesday. Only finished 1-4. That's not exactly what Sheila Ford Hamp is going to be looking for. Now, one of those games, he wasn't able to be there because of COVID, and that was by far their worst loss. So I don't know. Maybe that speaks to, maybe that could have happened if he was there. Maybe it wouldn't have. Either way, it was terrible. It was 40-0 at one point. It was 47-7 was the final. But he was not there. In the games that he was there, we served a, pretty solid loss to the Tennessee Titans, no question about that. But the team definitely rallied around him. They fought against Green Bay. They beat Chicago Bears, which we haven't done in a while. And this weekend, even though we have the worst defense has gotten honestly worse since Darrell Bevell has taken over and Matt Patricia has gone. The offense has obviously gotten much, much better, and we were very competitive against the Minnesota Vikings. And honestly, with some other calls, maybe we go out and win that game. No question that without Matt Patricia, Matthew Stafford was playing on an entirely different level, taking a lot more shots, pushing the ball down the field. We saw that the first week that he took over as the Lions interim head coach. Matthews just looked like a different guy. He said it was vintage Matthew Stafford, and this team rallied. They weren't very good, but they did make some clutch plays, especially in the Bears game. And we saw that again against Minnesota when they made that key goal line stop. And even though the call didn't allow them to get the stop, they showed up when they needed it. They just are clearly a mess on the defensive side of things. Now, Darrell Bevell does have some experience, which not a lot of other guys will, at least of being a head coach and, running practice, things like that. But there's still a lot of questions with him, just like any other guy out there, because he hasn't had the opportunity to go hire a defensive coordinator, to go hire somebody to go help build a team during the offseason. And he's never done that before. He's only been an offensive coordinator at his highest rank. So there's still a lot of questions around him. But if you're looking at history, it serves well for an interim head coach for the Detroit Lions. It's the only guy that's won us a playoff game in the last 60 years was an interim head coach, and that was Wayne Fontes. So while Darrell Bevell, I don't believe he will get the job here. I do think he has maybe somewhat of a case elsewhere, definitely as an offensive coordinator, because his offense, again, it seemed to do pretty darn well. And he wants to keep building that running attack. So if you do keep him, that rushing attack will be a primary focus. And we know for certain that he can bring the best out of Matthew Stafford. We saw it without Patricia, and we saw it in 2019 when Stafford was playing the best football we have ever seen. So editing me here, I must point out the fact that Darrell Bevell was given a credit from Pete Carroll for drafting Russell Wilson. He called it Bevell's project, so maybe he could find a quarterback if he needs to as well. I don't really expect him to get the job, to be honest with you, but I think it is a must that you do interview him because, again, he was the only guy with hands-on experience, and interim head coaches do fare well in Detroit, and he's always someone that you got to keep there as an option because just because you interview these guys doesn't mean they're necessarily going to want to take the job. Right now, not knowing what the salary cap is going to look like for next season with all that kind of up in the air, Darrell Bevell still being under contract as an offensive coordinator for the Lions, and he could be looking for a bump if he became our head coach. He definitely would be looking for that. But knowing that it's a weird offseason with the money situation, and knowing that just because you want a guy, if there's a certain guy on your list that you really want to get, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to accept that deal. Detroit may not be the easiest sell for people, whether it's the GM position or the head coach position. We'll just have to wait and see if anybody bites on it, who's going to bite on it. But for Darrell Bevell, that could work in his favor as to, hey, obviously, he'd be interested in taking this job next season. He's loved doing what he's doing here, and now he has a little bit of that experience under his belt within the organization. The question is, do they believe in him to be their next head coach, or does Sheila Ford Hamp want to go her own way? I think she'll want to go and just go get her own coach. I think she'll want to do it because now she's the full-time owner. Hey, I want to go hire my GM and head coach. I think she'll make that decision, and that's what she'll do this offseason. But that craziness of the offseason could potentially work in Bevell's favor. But that is Darrell Bevell. On Thursday, we will be interviewing Robert Sala. I know he is a fan favorite. Robert Sala from San Francisco. Definitely not my favorite, but he is a fan favorite. And again, we've done a whole video on Robert Sala, so I don't want to go into it too much because we have the pros and cons. I did that video a couple weeks ago, so go check that out. I mean, it's a pretty long video, but you guys all know about Robert Sala at this point. Right now, he is the defensive coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers, who lost yesterday to the Seattle Seahawks. That was a really good game, though. So he's the defense coordinator for them. I think what's really going to benefit Robert Sala, I think clearly is what's going to benefit Robert Sala, is he has a lot of support behind him, one, but not only does he have a lot of support behind him, he's also from Michigan. He coached at Michigan State, Central Michigan, did some work there. So I think those Michigan ties are really going to come back to help him. Also, I think Chris Spielman will help him as well. He's a linebacker guy. Chris Spielman's a linebacker guy because he was a linebacker, and he's, with the Detroit Lions front office. He's the favorite to get the job. He's near the top of the list right now for the right reasons. He, to me, is probably the favorite. If I was a betting man on who the Lions would hire, I would bet that Robert Sala will get the job. Does that mean he's my top candidate? No, but I would bet that he will get the job. However, Robert Sala, you guys know about him. Thursday video if you want to check it out. He will interview on Thursday. And next week, sometime, they have Arthur Smith listed here. Arthur Smith is the former offensive lineman for North Carolina that currently is the offensive coordinator for the Tennessee Titans. One thing about Arthur Smith that's really helping him is, well, the last two seasons. I mean, Tennessee has been much, much better in scoring under him as the offensive coordinator. 2018, they weren't very good at it, averaging less than 20 a game. But in 2019, 25 points per game. In this season, up to 30 points per game. We know that they are back in the playoffs once again. And that offense, being an offensive lineman, is all about trenches, man. It's all about setting up the play action, and that's why Ryan Tannehill has taken a big step forward, which kind of reminds me of what Darrell Bevell tried to do a little bit here. I think he had to adjust as the season went on. It was definitely a goal was to do things through the trenches for the Detroit Lions. Maybe that was less Darrell Bevell. Maybe that was more Matt Patricia. Either way, it's kind of similar to, I think, to what the Lions were trying to do here with the rushing attack. Lions have to request permission to interview Arthur Smith, but I think one thing about Arthur, that if he was the Lions head coach, hypothetically, I think he'd be in a spot there, he'd be pretty happy because I think you have an offensive line that's pretty well built for the future. Maybe could use some tweaks, but you have a lot of young guys, and you have a lot of guys under contract. Plus, you have DeAndre Swift. Make a couple tweaks to that, and he could be thinking, okay, I think I can make maybe the Titans offense 2.0 here. So I think he'd be actually thrilled by what he's looking at with the Lions roster, and I really do think he is a sleeper potential candidate. Like, don't sleep on Arthur Smith being the Lions' next head coach. I'm telling you, this guy to me is the under-the-radar guy that people aren't talking about that may just get the job. I'm just saying, he did it with Tennessee. It's working really well, and it's taken Ryan Tannehill to another level. And we know Derrick Henry has the most yards of any running back in the league. So I would say, he's had some success there, and that is an offensive mind, which kind of mixes it up. Now, he does have the defensive ties in his past, so he has had some opportunities to work there. He was a defensive quality control coach in Washington back in 2008, and he was also an intern in 2010. So with Ole Miss, he does have ties in his past to both the offensive side and the defensive side, but mainly his work has come on the offensive line, some of the tight end position, but now he's the offensive coordinator for Tennessee after being promoted. Matt LaFleur left to the Green Bay, and right now Tennessee is really clicking very well, and that offense is done a very good job. The head coach that we have to talk about is Dan Campbell here. Now, we haven't talked about Dan Campbell at all. We've talked about all the other four guys before. Dan Campbell is someone that we have not talked about. And I think on Twitter, he said finally, he was excited, finally I get an opportunity. So that's supposed to be sometime also next week. Kind of to be determined type of deal. But he is an assistant head coach and a tight end coach right now for the New Orleans Saints. Now, keep that in mind, New Orleans Saints, because that will come back a lot in today's video. But let's talk about Dan Campbell a little bit because we haven't talked about him before. Very quickly. He's a running back / tight end in high school. He was a tight end at Texas A&M, where he was a third-round pick by the New York Giants. He also spent about 3 years, 2006 to 2009, with the Detroit Lions. Hold up, so he's got some ties as a player in Detroit. Now, 2006 to 2009, You can say those weren't our glory years. That's for sure. He became tight end coach for Miami Dolphins. And in 2015, their head coach was fired after a rough start to the season. I believe it was a 1-3 start to the season. So they fired their head coach and they decided to promote who was their assistant head coach and their tight end coach here, and Dan Campbell, to the head coach of the team for the rest of the season. They want to see if they could turn it around. You know, they're talking about, hey, all our goals are still in front of us. We can still make everything happen. So he became the head coach. And this team was struggling. I mean, their losses were 10+ points. They weren't looking very good. Miami was just like, wow, what's going on here? So they gave Dan Campbell the opportunity, and he took a interesting approach. He took a very assertive, aggressive approach. You don't see that all the time, especially from guys that are interims, but he took this approach very strongly. In practice, he was all about competition. So he did the Oklahoma drill, right? Bringing back the Oklahoma drill. He definitely changed things up a little bit with the Miami Dolphins, but he talked about that he wanted to change the culture, and he would have to be the guy to change the culture. He also really focused on the offensive line and defensive line introductory press conference, because he said that it all starts with the offensive line and the defensive line. So knowing that it starts there, he's all about going at each other, you know, playing really competitive in practice, just going at it and being ready for game days. And Miami did turn around. They won their next 2 games. They did very well. Unfortunately, they only finished that season at 5-7. It was better than what necessarily it was looking. They finished the season 5-7. He decided to leave after that year because he didn't get any opportunities as a head coach. I guess no teams came calling for him after his interim opportunity. He went to New Orleans to now be their assistant head coach and their tight end coach, and that's where he currently is right now. So he had an opportunity as an interim head coach, which means he had 12 games as an opportunity, kind of like the whole Darrell Bevell situation, just a little bit more experience. Being a tight end coach, having that experience in the background could definitely help, knowing the Lions currently right now having Jesse James. We're trying to figure out what's going on there. Hawkinson, one of the best tight ends in the game. You have your young Hunter Bryants. So tight end, that obviously helps if he has that experience in the past. If he was their next head coach, you would think that those guys may get a little bit of a boost. Maybe they get more opportunities. And that could be good when you have one of the top tight ends. So I'm just saying that could have something to do with it. He was one of the youngest head coaches. I believe it was 41 when he took over as the interim head coach. Very young head coach when he took over. But kind of reminds me of Chris Spielman. Just listen to him talk. Just look at how he's built. He looks like Chris Spielman to me. I don't know. I feel like Spielman's really going to like this dude. I don't know what it is. The energy just seems kind of similar. Just a younger Chris Spielman. I don't know. I feel like this is a guy that he's really going to like.
To change the culture. I have to change the culture. And that's what I intend to do. And what that means is we need to become a more aggressive front. Or teams in general. We need to get our front 4 on defense, our front 5 on the offensive line, just as a whole. We need to breed a culture of competitiveness, finish, and intensity.
The team definitely did seem to improve after, firing the first head coach that was 1-3, and then he taking over, finishing 5-7. They did win their next 2 games. That would mean their last 10 they finished 3-7. So definitely maybe not the best finish that season, but it seemed like it was better though than where they thought it was going. But again, he didn't get any calls after that season. The very next year, Adam Gase took over as their head coach and went 10-6. So it's not his full team. He didn't have the full control as the head coach from the offseason or anything like that. So, but he still was the assistant head coach. So, maybe it's like, okay, well, if it's his team, if he's the head coach, the teammate goes better. But definitely maybe a little bit concerned there. But the experience is nice that he's at least done it, and it won't be completely new to him to being at least a head coach if he was here as our head coach. That is something that I like, and it's something that no one else on the schedule actually has. That's some good, valuable opportunity to learn from Sean Payton. Sean Payton is a very aggressive coach, which is something that you expect that he would bring with him. And we've already seen how aggressive he is, just his personality and how intense he is. So I don't know. He just seems like a hype man. He's just really pumped up. You guys want to talk about a guy that's really pumped up and they give a lot of energy? Dan Campbell seems to be giving it up. The last guy on the schedule for the Detroit Lions, sometimes next week, does say they will interview him. But remember, he's from the New Orleans Saints, because now let's take a look at some of those general manager candidates. First GM candidate, I'm going to try to go through these pretty fast, is Terry Fontana. I think that's how you say his name. That will be on Tuesday, who is right now the Saints assistant GM. That's one of his roles. There's actually 2 assistant GMs right now, and both of them are going to have interviews with the Detroit Lions. So interesting, the Saints assistant GM, right? We just talked about Dan Campbell, who's with the Saints right now. So obviously there is a tie there. But here's what Terry Fontana has done. Started with the New Orleans Saints in marketing. Yeah, he got his opportunity through marketing. So he was marketing, and I guess the front office, and I guess they noticed him and doing his job really well. He said they must have noticed me because I was doing my job very well. And they said, hey, you did want to work. You got to work here in a scouting department with us. So he got his opportunity there. He's actually been working there for 18 years. He started as a pro scout, became the director of pro scouting for another 7 years, and then he has been promoted in 2020 to the assistant general manager with the New Orleans Saints. As we know, in his time being with the New Orleans Saints, they have been one of the most successful franchises, and he was around that time when they really picked it up, because since Sean Payton has got there, they have been a pretty darn good team every single year. I mean, they've been a competitive team. They've been a playoff contender pretty much every single year. Sometimes they don't make it. Given a very good reputation, and they say he plays a very big role in a lot of moves they make. But clearly, when you're with the New Orleans Saints and you have the success that you do, I mean, you're going to get a lot of calls. You're going to get a lot of calls because the Saints have so much success. You know, people are always looking for that. Hey, can I get a little bit of what the Saints got? Now, if he can bring with him Sean Payton as well, okay, now I'm buying. I'm just saying, if you can bring Sean Payton, you can, you know, come over here. We'll bring it all together. I'm feeling good. Hey, maybe we're the next New Orleans Saints. We thought we were the Detroit Patriots. Now we're the Detroit Saints because we've now are interviewing an assistant coach for New Orleans and an assistant GM. But guess what? It doesn't stop there. Let's take a look at another one. This is Jeff Ireland. Now, Jeff Ireland is scheduled to have an interview with the Detroit Lions on Friday. He is also a Saints assistant general manager right now. So yeah, they have a couple of those guys. Starting just working for the NFL Draft Combine, but then with Kansas City in 1997 to 2000. He then worked with the Dallas Cowboys. And with the Dallas Cowboys, he seemed to have a very good amount of success. He was actually promoted at one point to the vice president of scouting. And in his final year there, they went 13-3. And 38 of the 53 players on that roster were brought in when he was there. That's very impressive. So he left after a 13-3 season, and he's like, you know what? I'm going to Miami. I'm going to make it happen. So he became the vice president of football operations with Miami, where Bill Parcells was the GM, so we know all the connections there. So he goes to Miami, and in Miami, it started very hot. They were the first team in NFL history, maybe the only teams to this day, that had one win, and then the next year came back and won the division. So it was like, this guy, everything he touched, it turns to gold, man. They're just winning everywhere he goes. However, it didn't last that long. It kind of went downhill pretty darn fast. So in Miami, things kind of got out of hand. I guess there was an interview with Des Bryant that went really bad, and he said some things and asked some things that people didn't like. Miami Dolphins fans were really pushing for him to get out for years. I guess they were flying blimps across the stadium saying, hey, fire the Ireland. Like, that's not a good thing. That's definitely not a good thing. And they ultimately decided to mutually part ways in 2014. He then went with the Seattle Seahawks. He was trying to, get back on track with Seattle. Pete Carroll. We've talked about, there's so many connections when you really think about all these guys talk about. But with Seattle, it just didn't work out. He was a draft consultant there. He was given another opportunity, but unfortunately, it didn't last at all. Only 1 month. They even talk about extensions, but it only lasts 1 month, and Seattle decided to move on. Now the Saints have now brought him in a job, and he has now worked his way up to the assistant GM here. So kind of interesting, right? Another connection, right? 2 Saints assistant GMs and a guy that's currently the tight end and assistant head coach for the New Orleans Saints. I mean, this is crazy. Now, the great thing about all these connections is that when you interview one guy, you can ask about the other guy. You can learn about this guy. You can learn a lot about these 3 people from different people's perspective and from their own perspective. You can see what kind of answers. Are they the same? Are they different? This will be interesting. I think this would be a very fun interview to have because 3 guys working on the same team right now. That's pretty crazy. Also, he was a special teams coach at college in North Texas, so he does have a little bit of coaching experience on his resume as well. With Brad Holmes, who's currently now with the Los Angeles Rams. So I think St. Louis all the time, but Los Angeles Rams. And he has spent a pretty good amount of time with the Rams as well. 8 years there as director of college scouting. He's been given a lot of credit for what he's been able to do with later round draft picks because when you look at what he's done is the last couple of years, they haven't had, I think they said last like 4 years or something like that, they haven't had a first round pick and they've still been able to find some talent. We know that the Rams have basically turned their kind of franchise around. 2011, they were 2-14, but since then, 7 wins, 6 wins, 7 wins, only 4 wins, 11 wins, 13 wins, 9 wins. So you can see with Sean McVay, we know they've kind of turned things around a little bit over there. And he's been with the Rams for a pretty good amount of time. He's known to be a very patient, a very emotional. So he's really an easy guy to talk to, I guess. He's a very good people person, I guess. Detailed, oriented person. He also has football family, has that football background. Look, Brad Holmes is kind of interesting. He has a football background. His family members being there, his dad being a Pittsburgh Steelers offensive lineman, his grandfather being a high school football player. And I guess his parents were kind of like, hey, you should go into scouting instead of being a player. And his path is kind of confusing. I can't really understand it too much, but I believe at one point he was looking to get into the NFL, and he was initially connected to Martin Mayhew, obviously the Lions connection there. I don't think anything really happened with that, though. Started in public relations for the Rams, and again, he worked his way up. So public relations, marketing, you're working your way up from that. I mean, that's pretty impressive to work your way up to that job. That's definitely a good thing on your resume for sure, and doesn't seem like there's a lot of bad here. Some playing experience as well. So not a lot of bad there. Next name that we missed on here as well, back to Wednesday, George Paton, the Vikings assistant general manager right now. Now, George Paton doesn't have all these connections and ties that we've discussed with the Saints, but he does have a different tie, and that's with Chris Spielman's brother, right? So, working with Chris Spielman's brother in Miami and with the Minnesota Vikings right now as the assistant general manager, I gotta believe that is a huge factor. Also, the interesting thing about George Paton is not only has he worked with his brother, but Paton has been one of the most sought-after GM candidates in the last couple of years that I've personally ever seen. I think it's like the most right now in the last since 2015 that anybody's ever had in terms of how many interviews that teams have wanted to have. The Titans, the Colts, the 49ers, the Chiefs, the Browns, the Jets, all of those teams have requested interviews. The interesting thing is pretty much every single one of those teams, aside from the Jets, have done pretty well, and they haven't hired him. But George Paton is a very sought after guy, and apparently the Jets multiple times have looked for him. So maybe if they can get him, they'd be very happy. But now apparently the Detroit Lions are going to interview him, and I think that connection with Chris Spielman's brother, I feel like him and his brother, they chat, right? They chat a little bit. So there's going to be something there. I think that's a very big connection. But he's been a huge factor in building one of the top defenses we know in 2017. And look, the Spielman thing connection goes back past Minnesota. It goes back to Miami when they worked together for like 6 years. So they've done a really good job of building that defense. We know they've done very good with building defense. They landed on some top guys like Hunter, Dalvin Cook, this year Justin Jefferson. In terms of drafting, I think George has done a pretty solid job. I've actually liked a lot of George's picks when he's drafted. He's landed some of the top talent, when they brought in Dalvin Cook, Justin Jefferson this year. I also loved, the Cameron Dantzler pick. That was one of my guys. But I like how he does in the draft. Now, this year didn't go so well. They had troubles with injuries, obviously the COVID opt-out, and also the whole Kirk Cousins situation will be interesting to see how that plays out. But I do like how he does in drafts. I feel like I could rock with how he drafts. I'm just going to say that. So I can definitely see that this is going to be a guy that the Lions are probably going to be pretty high on for sure. I definitely think so. He got started with the Chicago Bears back in the late 90s. He was promoted to the director of pro personnel with Chicago Bears, and then the Dolphins, and then Minnesota Vikings. So a couple of NFC North rivals as well. Hey, why not go to the Detroit Lions, right? So same thing with George Paton is, while they may be interviewing him, it just may not happen. And maybe it will because Chris Spielman gives him a better shot. But unfortunately, teams that have even interviewed him that tried to hire him, like the Cleveland Browns, he basically kind of stepped out. He's like, you know what? No, never mind. I don't really want to be here with the Cleveland Browns. Kevin Stefanski apparently was a very big fan of George Paton, wanted them to work together, and he was kind of in the door, but then he kind of backed out the door. He's like, never mind. I'm going to stay with the Minnesota Vikings. So it's been very difficult to prime away for Minnesota. Teams haven't been able to do it yet, but maybe that connection helps if the Detroit Lions are trying to do that. Then finally, you see John Schneider on here we talked about yesterday. I don't think John Schneider is much of a legitimate candidate as of now, unless things change. It seems like right now he's pushing it as it's just a rumor, it's just entertainment, and right now it's to be determined. So we'll see if this is just simply a rumor, so they just threw it on here, or what this is. I don't know if they're actually going to interview him or not. We will see. Maybe we'll get some more news on that as time goes on. Now, John Schneider's a very well-decorated GM that gets a lot of praise. In the last couple of years, maybe not as much, saying that he's missing on more picks, making some very questionable trades, especially the Jamal Adams trade, which not a lot of people love that one. And it seemed like Russell Wilson's doing kind of everything right now, and we'll see how far they get into the playoffs. But in the past, like when he first got there, the most successful I think he was that was hitting on late-round picks. So many third-round or later picks were successful. Obviously Russell Wilson, but it goes on and on with Richard Sherman, Cameron Chancellor, Tyler Lockett, KJ Wright, and then you have the undrafted guys, Doug Baldwin, Thomas Rawls, Jermaine Kearse. It was that ability to hit on those later picks and make them successful also in drafted free agents that I think really sticks out to me as his best trade as a general manager. So there you go. Those are the interviews coming up within the next week or so. I'm expecting many more. A couple of guys I would like to see. Eberflus for sure. I would love to see the Lions interview Eberflus because personally, you guys know I want experience at head coach. That's like my thing. I want experience at head coach, being a head coach before. But if you're going to hire a coordinator, someone that hasn't been a head coach before, I think Eberflus gives a very good shot because he has a very good resume behind him. Maybe my favorite resume behind simply just a coordinator. Without experience, he may be my favorite coordinator because of what he's done in multiple places. Toledo, Missouri, when they were really good, and now what he's doing with the Indianapolis Colts. Had a lot of success multiple different places, so he might be a guy that's honestly top of my list in terms of just simply only being a coordinator, not ever being a head coach. So Eberflus is definitely up there. I hope they give him an interview. A couple of names to look out for. You got Greg Roman who could come up. You got Bryant Dabble who come up. All these different teams are interviewing these guys, so it's going to cycle around. The Lions have to interview so many people as well. I don't expect a hiring anytime soon, but those are some interviews coming up. Also, hopefully they interview some guys with some head coaching experience, please. Come on, man. Hey, that is it for today's video. Let me know your thoughts, comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.